In the early afternoon of Tuesday the 9th of July 2024, a 26-year-old man called Kyle Clifford knocked on a door in Ashlyn Close in the town of Bushey in Hertfordshire in the UK. Outwardly, it appeared he was there to give back the belongings of his former girlfriend, 25-year-old Louise Hunt, but he was actually there to kill. And this violent, psychopathic misogynist, a follower of Andrew Tate, was there not only to end the life of his ex, but to wipe out her entire family. And he'd come prepared, armed with both a knife and a crossbow. Over the next 5 hours, Kyle engaged in an orgy of violence, taking the lives of not only Louise, but also her 28-year-old sister Hannah and their mother, 61-year-old Carol. The details of the horror that these 3 women went through in their final hours and the pure evil of their killer shocked the entire country. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Kyle Marcus Clifford was born on the 5th of April 1998 in Enfield, North London. There's very little information published about his upbringing, but what is known is that he was the third of 4 siblings. There are indicators that Kyle's father was violent. In court, the family was described as, quote, a mess. However, this is clearly an understatement. The Clifford household was rotten to the core and produced 2 killers. As well as the horrific crimes committed by Kyle, his elder brother Bradley was also a murderer. On the 5th of August 2017, an 18-year-old man called Soban Khan hit Bradley's Mustang with a bottle and then rode away on a scooter with his 19-year-old friend Joshua Francis riding pillion. Bradley, who was drunk, got into his car and chased the scooter through Enfield, driving at twice the speed limit and on the wrong side of the road. He drove straight into the back of the scooter, sending both Soban and Joshua flying into the air. Joshua survived, but Soban died, and whilst he lay fatally injured on the ground, Bradley got out of his car and punched him in the head 9 times, in full view of witnesses. In court, it was stated that Bradley saw the car as a status symbol and had threatened to stab to death anyone who touched it. In May 2018, Bradley Clifford was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 23 years for murder. As we'll come back to much later in the video, it's clear that the monster that Kyle became, like his brother, began in the family home, and it appears that he was taught that human life was cheap, and that those who offended him deserved to die. He also had an inflated sense of self-worth. Everyone was beneath him. He was racist, homophobic, transphobic, and misogynistic. He also had absolutely no remorse or conscience. As a child, it's reported that he was a bully and a, quote, wannabe gangster in school, and as the years progressed, the disgusting human being that is Kyle Clifford became more and more noticeable by those who interacted with him. He joined the British Army in around 2018, aged 19 or 20, and served for 3 years. He was a mediocre soldier who had no interest in actually serving his country. It's clear he wanted to preen and pose in his uniform, and he spent around half of his service hiding out at home, claiming he was ill. His commanding officer at the time wrote, quote, his character is wholly unsuited to military employment, and he has no care nor concern beyond himself. There were flashes of his violent tendencies during this time. In 2021, Kyle got into a drunken brawl in a pub with other squaddies, and on a separate occasion, under the same circumstances, he got into a fight with civilians. After he left the army, Kyle Clifford tried to get jobs in Civvy Street, but he was incredibly lazy, hardly ever showing up for work, often claiming he was ill, and when he was there, all he wanted to do was strut around, being the big man. Whilst most of us, if we had a relative in prison for murder, would hide this fact, Kyle would often talk about his brother Bradley with pride, referring to him as a, quote, geezer. His immaturity was continuously noted, as well as his utter self-absorption. Kyle Clifford was a man who believed that everyone should pander to him, do whatever he said, and there should be no consequences to his actions. He was also a lech, and would frequently make crass and derogatory comments about women in the workplace, stating he wanted to sleep with them even if they were married or had boyfriends. This was more than just banter. Kyle Clifford appeared to like making women feel uncomfortable, making them feel small, and this was underpinned by his utter contempt for females. They were there for men to possess, nothing more. These were just flashes of the true evil of Kyle Clifford, the narcissist, the psychopath, the violent misogynist, but it was what else was bubbling underneath, which were the most dangerous traits of all: his possessiveness, his controlling behaviour, his weak, pathetic inability to allow women to have autonomy once in a relationship with him, and his willingness to kill not only those who left him, but also their entire families. However, like so many other dangerous monsters I've covered on this channel, Kyle Clifford was able to wear a mask to hide the deep dark hole of emptiness inside of him, and he would draw people into his web. One of these was a young woman called Louise Hunt, and meeting Kyle would cost her not only her life, but lead to the deaths of her mother and one of her sisters. Louise Hunt was born in around 1999. She was the daughter of Carol and John Hunt, the latter being a BBC horse racing commentator. The pair had two other daughters, Hannah and Amy. In 2024, the family were living in 19 Ashlyn Close in Bushey, a quiet town where not much happens, in Hertfordshire, which is northwest of London. Due to the actions of one coward, 3 members of this family will be brutally murdered. This included Carol, who was described by those who knew her as gentle, beautiful and friendly, a woman who was devoted to her husband and children, who always had time for others. Hannah was like her mother, a kind, caring, considerate woman. She ran her own thriving beauty business, as well as working as a skin therapist at the anti-aging clinic in Radlett. Colleagues said that Hannah was a, quote, fantastic therapist, and that clients loved her. Hannah was in a long-term relationship with a man called Alex Klein, who wrote on Facebook after her death, quote, "R.I.P. the love of my life. I will never forget you. Stolen from me too soon. The brightest light in my life. My brave queen for life. Until we meet again, I love you, Hansie." Finally, there was Louise. The former schoolmate described her as, quote, "really sweet, very kind, always a positive person. I can't think of anything bad to say about her. A really lovely person all round, a super hard-working person." Comments about Louise's kind heart and work ethic come across again and again in tributes paid to her. She had aspirations and dreams for the future, and she worked hard running a dog grooming business out of a pod in the back garden. Unfortunately, little did she realise that meeting Kyle Clifford on the dating site Bumble in December 2022 would eventually rob her, her mother, and one of her sisters of any sort of future. Initially, like all domestic abusers, Kyle hid who he really was. He was charming, talkative, and was everything someone would want in a partner. He was also attentive, kind, and funny, but this was simply to get his foot in the door, to draw Louise into his web, and he soon began making sure she would never leave. Kyle tried to control Louise, with a friend who knew the couple later stating, quote, "Kyle was controlling, he used to ridicule Louise in public. He made himself out to be a nice guy, but in private, he was anything but. It was certain things, like Louise used to like wearing makeup, but then she stopped wearing makeup, and that was down to Kyle. He would also take issue with Louise staying out late and having any contact with other men. He didn't even like her having male friends." A note that Louise wrote on her phone, which we'll return to later, indicated that he would claim he was better than her and her loved ones. He even stated that he was more intelligent than everyone in her family. Again, like with other people he interacted with, Kyle proudly told Louise about what his brother Bradley was in prison for and would not condemn his actions. Many of Louise's friends appear to have taken an instant dislike to Kyle, and it's reported that at a gathering the pair had, he began playing videos of Andrew Tate, the man the judge in the case described as, quote, "a poster boy for misogynists, a poster boy for those who view women as possessions to be controlled." He also apparently played videos of an animal being drugged and thought it was hilarious. He also bragged to Louise's friends that he had no issue with physical violence. As well as this, Louise was exposed to Kyle's racist, homophobic and transphobic attitudes, as well as instances of road rage. Whilst controlling Louise and keeping her away from other men, unbeknownst to her, Kyle was sleeping with at least 2 other women behind her back. As usual with scum like this, It's one rule for them and a different rule for everyone else. However, to Louise's parents, Carol and John, it appears that Kyle, to some extent, kept up his mask and ingratiated himself into the home. They both had concerns about Kyle, especially Carol, who thought he was immature, but they wanted to support their daughter and so indulged the relationship. In fact, it seems they took pity on Kyle and he was welcomed with open arms. They paid for hotels for the couple to stay in and even went on holidays at their expense. In addition, he spent Christmas 2023 with the family after the pair had been together for a year, and this was apparently a happy time. Perversely, I think the very decent and welcoming way in which Kyle was treated by the Hunt family is linked to why he wanted to kill them all, but I'll return to this later. It's important to remind people to be respectful about the victims in this video and realise that hindsight is a wonderful thing. The red flags in this case are clear now, but so many people don't see them until they're too late. Also, we make excuses for the people we love. We overlook their behaviour, often to our detriment. However, although Louise tolerated Kyle's behaviour for 18 months, in June 2024 she had had enough and decided to end the relationship. She wrote a note on her phone, addressed to herself, to look back on if she was tempted to get back with him. It stated, quote, "When you're sad, look. His brother is in prison, he still sees him every week and never said what he did was horrendous. His family is a mess, racist comments, says he doesn't like transgenders, road rage, belittling language, said he had a higher IQ than all my family, would tell me all the violent acts his brother and dad would do, and when I went to their house, he would find it amusing." On Tuesday the 25th of June 2024, Louise Hunt met with Kyle and ended the relationship. It seems likely that he asked her to reconsider, but the next day she was resolute in her decision and sent Kyle a message showing her compassion and the mature way she handled the breakup. She wrote, quote, "Good morning, hope you're doing okay this morning. I'm sorry, Kyle, but I feel I can't continue with what we have. I feel like it's been broken, and I can't ignore how I've been feeling or made to feel in our relationship over the course of the year. I don't know that in the future, if we both do the work on ourselves, this could be something amazing, but I just feel right now I owe it to myself to take some space and walk away for my own sanity and health. Thank you for the incredible time we've had this year. I hope you know how much I love you, and still will for a long time. I never want there to be anything nasty between us ever. Take care of yourself always, please." Kyle responded in an equally respectful manner, writing, "Thank you for the clarity, Louise, so we can both start our healing process. I love you so much, and I will for a very long time. I will always be here for you if you ever need me. Please don't hesitate. I wish you all the best, and take care of yourself too." Despite this outwardly calm response, Kyle Clifford was fuming. The woman he believed he controlled, his property, was daring to leave him. Immediately after this, he began to plan his revenge. Just 13 days after this last message exchange, Louise Hunt and 2 members of her family would be brutally murdered by this psychopathic monster. Immediately after his relationship with Louise Hunt ended on Wednesday the 26th of June 2024, Kyle Clifford spiralled and he began planning his revenge. He wrote 2 pathetic self-pitying notes which were later found on his phone, one addressed to his family members and one to himself. The one written to himself read, quote, "To myself, I am so sorry I didn't give myself a chance to move on past this, to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know you want to find peace, and it's a battle in your head right now. What's different this time? I don't want to live my life without her. I don't want to experience new things. Nothing I can think of can make me happy. I know I could have gone to therapy, found faith, and become a new, better person, but I just simply don't want to. I'm so sorry. I didn't wait to move on and find my future wife, have the children I always wanted. I'm sorry, Kyle." I mean, what a self-pitying load of bollocks. The interesting thing in this note is where he says, "I could have been a better person, but I can't be bothered." His note to his family is even more sinister, and it indicates that Kyle was planning something, and he had no intention of being around to suffer the consequences. Quote, "Please don't think of this as me throwing my life away. I have lived, and I am grateful for everything and everyone that has been a part of it. It is now my time to leave and be at peace, as this is what I ultimately want. I know you will all have so many questions. I wish you could have done something different to prevent this. However, none of you have failed. There is simply nothing any of you could have done. This is my decision to just be at peace. You all have to take care of each other and speak to each other, because that will be the best thing for you all. I love you all so much." On Friday the 28th of June 2024, just 2 days after his relationship with Louise Hunt ended, Kyle Clifford began collecting the tools he intended to use to kill her, but also every member of her family. Why he wanted to kill them all is unclear. We can only speculate. I think this was about punishment. He wanted to destroy everything that was associated with Louise, everything that she loved. This was a consequence of defying him. However, I believe there was more, and I'll return to this later. On this date, he was caught on CCTV buying a 30-metre length of rope from Tool Station in Enfield. 2 days later, Kyle was searching for information about crossbows, as well as watching violent pornography. On Monday the 1st of July, Kyle Clifford had one of 2 prison phone calls with his murderer brother Bradley. The second was on Monday the 8th of July, the day before the murders. The pair spoke about weapons, and whilst Kyle didn't tell his sibling what he was planning, Bradley asked him whether he was, quote, planning on going on the rampage or something. On Wednesday the 3rd of July, 6 days before the massacre, Kyle ordered a Horizon Comet MXT-405 crossbow, 6 bolts, and a cocking device to be delivered to his home. He also purchased a Glock air pistol, no doubt to hold the family at gunpoint, but this didn't arrive in time. On Thursday the 4th of July, Kyle purchased duct tape from B&Q in Enfield, as well as buying 2 petrol cans from Halfords. From his later searches, it was clear that he wasn't just planning on killing members of the Hunt family. He was going to set fire to their home. He didn't just want to end their lives, he wanted to wipe them from the face of the earth. The next day, Kyle Clifford was captured on CCTV going into the gym, carrying on like nothing was going on. At this point, he was just 4 days from committing an atrocity which would shock the country. On Saturday the 6th of July, Kyle took delivery of a 10-inch steel butcher's knife he'd ordered online. He now had all the tools he needed to carry out his plan. On Monday the 8th of July 2024, Kyle Clifford spent the final 24 hours before his crimes making his final preparations. He was also found to have watched various Andrew Tate videos during this time, no doubt reinforcing his own misogyny, pumping himself up, convincing himself that these women deserved to die. At 9:54 a.m. on Tuesday the 9th of July 2024, the day of the murders, Kyle Clifford was captured on CCTV going into a garden centre with family members, acting completely normally. There were no indicators that he was anxious or nervous about the fact that just a few hours later he was planning on wiping out the entire family. In the early afternoon, Kyle loaded his car with his tools of murder. This included the 10-inch butcher knife, the crossbow, bolts, duct tape and canisters of petrol. At 1:07 p.m, he drove from his home in Enfield, North London, towards the Hunt family home, and 30 minutes later arrived in the town of Bushey, parking up in Vernon Road. At 1:39 p.m, Kyle got out of his car and walked towards Ashlyn Close and looked outside the Hunt's home at number 19. He wanted to see how many cars were parked out of the front to ensure that all of the family members were there. 3 vehicles were parked on the drive that day. After seeing this, Kyle Clifford returned to his own car, and at 1:48 p.m, he conducted a search about horse races running that day to try to establish whether John Hunt was at home or away working. It should be noted that the location of Amy Hunt, the eldest daughter, is not mentioned in reports. I'm unsure whether she lived at the address as well, and therefore managed to avoid being killed, or whether she lived elsewhere. Regardless, at 1:58 p.m, Kyle Clifford moved his car closer to Ashlyn Close, finally parking on Bushey Grove Road. He then spent around 30 minutes lightly psyching himself up before getting out of the vehicle and he was captured walking towards the Hunt residence, carrying a plastic bag containing clothes and wearing a backpack which contained the butcher knife and duct tape. At 2:32 p.m, Kyle knocked on the front door and Carol Hunt opened it. They interacted for several minutes and their conversation was caught on the Ring doorbell camera. Kyle said, quote, "Just dropping off some of Louise's stuff." Carol then asked how he was, and he responded, "I'm good, thank you." Carol, showing the decent woman that she was, tried to give Kyle comfort and some words of advice to take forward in his own life. She told him, maybe think in the next relationship the way you are, and maybe try and change. If you carry on like this, you'll end up on your own. I don't think you're a nasty person. Well, I wish you luck, Kyle. The pair continued to chat, with Kyle asking whether John was home or not. All the while, he acted entirely normally. It's reported that in the plastic bag, as well as some of Louise's clothes, was a thank you note he'd addressed to Carol and John. This was all a ruse to get inside the house, and unfortunately this worked. On the pretense of dropping off his ex-girlfriend's belongings and collecting his own, at 2:39 p.m, Kyle Clifford was let into the house. Approximately 2 minutes later, he attacked Carol, stabbing her 8 times in the chest and stomach with a butcher's knife. She died almost instantly. Kyle moved her body to a room off the hallway and covered it with a blanket. Louise Hunt was in the pod in the back garden, running her dog grooming business. She had no idea that her ex had just murdered her mother. I imagine that from inside the house, Kyle saw Louise busy working, and he was planning his next move. Having killed Carol, at 3:07 p.m, Kyle returned to his car and collected the crossbow, which he hid under a blanket, before returning to the address and letting himself back in. He then sat, waiting for approximately an hour for Louise to come back into the house. At 4:12 p.m, Louise walked back in and straight into the clutches of her ex. Kyle bound her ankles and wrists with duct tape, which he also used to cover her mouth. It's known that this was the moment of the attack, as the Ring doorbell caught the sound of a faint scream. Louise was kept alive for 2.5 hours. We can only imagine the fear she felt during this time. I have no doubt that Kyle Clifford was bragging to her about what he'd done to her mother, and what he was going to do to her, her father and sister when they returned home. Louise likely spent her last few hours on this earth, knowing she was going to die. Whilst Louise was bound and gagged, Kyle raped her. At 5:52 p.m, he used Louise's mobile to text her father John, trying to establish when he would be home, so he could kill him. Kyle texted, quote, "What time are you home?" John responded, "Late, I'm afraid. Everything okay, sweetness?" He received the following reply, "Just want to check. The race on Saturday starts a little later than usual. I think it's 4:30 to 7:30 p.m. Then there's a famous DJ after racing. Is that sounding okay?" At 6:50 p.m, the Ring doorbell camera captured a noise described as a whoosh in court reports. This was Kyle firing a crossbow bolt into Louise's back at point-blank range, killing her. This same time, Hannah Hunt pulled up, arriving home from work. She entered the house at 6:52 p.m. and called out, asking why her mother had not answered the phone. She didn't initially sense anything was wrong, as Kyle had hidden away. Hannah went upstairs, but soon afterwards she saw the man that had killed her sibling and her mother. She began crying and screaming. Hannah was able to send a frantic message to her partner, begging for him to call the police. A few moments later, at 6:54 p.m, another whooshing noise was captured by the Ring doorbell. This was the sound of Kyle firing a crossbow bolt straight into Hannah's chest. He then collected up his weapons and was captured on CCTV walking away from the site of the massacre. Again, he was concealing the crossbow under a blanket, before getting into his car and driving away. Hannah Hunt was critically injured, but still alive, and at 6:58 p.m, she made a call to 999, in which she said, quote, "My sister's ex-boyfriend has come in, and he shot us." She was able to give the address before the call cut out. Armed police officers and paramedics descended on 19 Ashlyn Close, arriving at 7:10 p.m, and they stepped into a scene that will likely haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the house, they found the body of 61-year-old Kyle Hunt. It was clear that she'd passed away hours before. Her death was formally recorded at 7:23 p.m. 25-year-old Louise Hunt was found, still bound and gagged. She too was clearly beyond saving, and her death was recorded at 7:31 p.m. 28-year-old Hannah Hunt was found slumped in the hallway, still alive, with a crossbow bolt lodged in her chest. Despite efforts to save her, she died at 7:51 p.m. Word quickly spread about the horror that had descended on this sleepy town, but it's important never to forget what John Hunt and his only surviving daughter Amy must have gone through in those first few hours. Can you imagine being contacted by the police and being told that 3 members of your family have been murdered? Cannot even imagine the pain they both felt, the utter devastation, all caused by a sad little freak who couldn't accept his relationship breaking down. It didn't take the police long to establish who had committed these heinous crimes, and a manhunt began. The CCTV footage in the local area and the Ring doorbell footage at 19 Ashlyn Close made it clear that Kyle Clifford was the man responsible for 3 savage murders. This was a man capable of extreme violence, armed with a crossbow, and so, at 9 a.m. on Wednesday the 10th of July 2024, the day after the killings, his name and image were released, with the public being asked to assist in apprehending this dangerous offender. 3 hours later, the police updated the public, saying that a crossbow had been used and the attacks had been targeted. An hour later, at 1 p.m, armed police began swarming not only the town of Bushey, but also Enfield in London, looking for their target. Armed officers raided Kyle's home in Rendlesham Road, but there was no sign of him at the property. However, his car was recovered, showing that after the murders, Kyle had scurried back to the area. He was in fact hiding in undergrowth in Lavender Hill Cemetery, around 200 metres from his home address. Police, acting on a tip-off, were seen running towards the cemetery at 4:30 p.m. when they surrounded it. As police marksmen closed in, Kyle Clifford turned the crossbow on himself and fired a bolt into his chest in a pathetic attempt to escape justice. However, he failed, and at just before 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday the 10th of July 2024, less than 24 hours after the manhunt started, Kyle Clifford was in custody, but seriously injured. He was taken to the Royal London Hospital for treatment. He spent almost 3 months in hospital, being guarded 24 hours a day by armed officers, and he was also handcuffed to the bed. As a result of shooting himself with a crossbow, Kyle had paralysed himself and will be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. By the middle of September, he was well enough to be interviewed, as shown by this clip. But just to warn you, aside from saying no comment, Kyle doesn't utter a word.
Do you accept, Kyle, that based on the evidence, that this is a premeditated murder of 3 people?
No comment.
Do you accept that you have meticulously planned this murder from the moment that you split up Louise?
No comment.
From the moment that she sent you that text message at the end of June, you began to plan her murder? Yes?
No comment.
It's evident quite clearly from your purchase of the crossbow, from your purchase of the additional bolts, from the purchase of the gun and the knife, in the 2 weeks leading up to the murders. Do you agree?
No comment.
Do you agree that it shows that you only had one thing in mind, and that planning began when you purchased these items? You purchased rope and you purchased duct tape in order to restrain Louise and Hannah and Carol, didn't you?
No comment.
6 days before this happened, you make these significant purchases that really only have one plausible explanation, didn't you?
No comment.
The only plausible explanation is that they were purchased in order for you to carry out these murders. Do you agree?
No comment.
You got to the address and you came well prepared. You came prepared with Louise's belongings, didn't you?
No comment.
Louise's belongings were your ticket into that address. Yes?
No comment.
You deceived your way into that address at the front door with Carol, pretending that you were having a civil and friendly conversation and returning Louise's property, and you'd even written out a thank you card. Yes?
No comment.
Next thing I'd like to speak to you about, Kyle, is some more information, some more evidence that we've obtained from the download of your mobile phone. So on the mobile phone, in the notes section, there is a note which is titled Last Letter, and it's written to different family members as individual paragraphs addressed to each individual family member. This item was created on the 26th of June, and the last modification was on the 7th of July. The opening part of the note reads as such: "Please don't think of this as me throwing my life away. I have lived, and I am grateful for everything and everyone that has been a part of it. It is now my time to leave and be at peace, as this is what I ultimately want. I know you will all have so many questions and wish you could have done something different to prevent this. However, none of you have failed, and there is simply nothing any of you could have done. This is my decision to just be at peace. You all have to take care of each other and speak to each other, as that will be the best thing for you all. I love you all so much." You okay, Carl? To carry on? When you wrote that note, had you already planned the murders of Louise, Carol and Hannah? So I'm interested in the words "prevent this." So tell me what you mean by "prevent this."
No comment.
Do you mean the murders of Carol, Hannah and Louise?
No comment.
The next note is addressed to myself. "I don't want to live my life without her. I don't want to experience new things. Nothing I can think of can make me happy. I know I could have gone to therapy, found faith, and become a new, better person, but I just simply don't want to. I'm so sorry I didn't wait to move on and find my future wife, have the children I always wanted." What do you mean by that?
No comment.
Explain to me why you decided to deprive Hannah and Louise of that privilege.
No comment.
What gave you the right to do that?
No comment.
What gave you the right to deprive Carol of seeing her future grandchildren?
No comment.
It's a very self-centred note and doesn't take into account anybody else. Do you agree with that?
No comment.
There's no apology to the Hunt family, is there?
No comment.
The only apology is to yourself. Do you feel that these are quite self-centred words?
No comment.
Why didn't you seek help, Kyle?
No comment.
You couldn't be bothered, is what the letter suggests. Am I wrong?
No comment.
You don't want to live your life without her. Explain that.
No comment.
But of course, you sit here in front of us and she's dead. Tell me how this has happened.
No comment.
Is your intention to make people feel sorry for you writing these letters?
No comment.
Look at your behaviour. Look how calmly and nonchalantly you walk away from that house. You've just killed 3 people and you stroll away like you're going down the shops. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a loss of control. You didn't go to the address and all of a sudden form this intent to kill Carol, kill Louise, kill Hannah. You'd gone there with that sole intention in mind. You went there. The CCTV footage shows throughout that you are cool, you are calm, you're collected, you're considered. There is nothing about that which suggests that you've gone there for anything else than to kill almost an entire family. I'm right in what I'm saying, aren't I, Kyle?
No comment.
Please correct me if I am completely wrong.
No comment.
The evidence against Kyle Clifford was overwhelming, and on Tuesday the 17th of September 2024, he was charged with the murders of Carol and Hannah Hunt as well as the rape and murder of Louise Hunt. He was remanded into prison, being sent to HMP Belmarsh, the highest security prison in the country, to await his fate. On Thursday the 19th of December 2024, Kyle Clifford appeared at Cambridge Crown Court via a video link from HMP Belmarsh, where he pleaded not guilty to all the charges against him. However, on Wednesday the 22nd of January 2025, much to everyone's surprise, he pleaded guilty to the murders of Carol and Hannah Hunt. He also pleaded guilty to murdering Louise Hunt, but he denied raping her before she died. Why I think Kyle changed his plea and admitted responsibility to killing 3 people, but denied sexually assaulting his ex-girlfriend, I'll come back to later. But it's important to remember that he's an evil man. Nothing he's ever done has been for anyone else but himself. None of this was about feeling remorse or regret for his actions. The Crown Prosecution Service decided to pursue the rape charge, and Kyle Clifford's trial for this offence began on Monday the 3rd of March 2025. Giving an indicator of what was to come, he refused to attend any day of his trial. Kyle's defence was weak and was conveyed by his barristers, who stated that according to him, any evidence of sexual contact between him and Louise dated back to the end of June, when they were in a relationship. However, the prosecution easily countered this, showing that the DNA found in Louise's body at her autopsy was recent and clearly not from weeks ago. It was during this trial that the prosecution exposed Kyle for what he was: violent misogynist, someone who had been watching videos of Andrew Tate spewing his vile hatred against women in the hours before the murders. After a trial that lasted 4 days, the jury took just 45 minutes to convict Kyle Clifford of raping Louise Hunt. On Tuesday the 11th of March 2025, the sentencing hearing began at Cambridge Crown Court in front of His Honour Judge Benetham. However, not in attendance was Kyle himself. He'd refused to travel to the court to hear his fate. Staff at HMP Belmarsh had also tried to get this pathetic little man to attend via video link from prison, but he refused to leave his cell. There was mention of restraints being used, with him literally being tied to his wheelchair and taken to the video link room and forced to listen to the proceedings. However, the judge said this would likely hamper the proceedings, and there was a potential that Kyle would kick off, cause further distress to the friends and family of the victims. Kyle Clifford was not sentenced until the afternoon, with the morning being dominated by the prosecution outlining the horrific details of the final minutes and hours of the lives of the Hunt family. John Hunt and his one surviving daughter Amy were in the court, and tears flowed down the faces of many who were there as John bravely took the stand to read out his victim impact statement, remembering his murdered wife and 2 murdered children. I won't cover the whole statement, but will read some of it, as it highlights front and centre the bravery of this man and what the world lost due to the evil of Kyle Clifford. Quote, "Do I really need to detail the impact of having 3/4 of my family murdered? But then I realised that this was my final opportunity to say what I want to say to you specifically, Kyle, words that will also be directed to your family, who will carry guilt forward for the rest of their lives. I know you valued them so poorly from all the conversations we had, Kyle, but I suppose even they must be damaged by what you have done. I also want to confirm to the world the truth, especially how Louise conducted herself within a textbook, mature breakup on her part, understanding the conflict of saying goodbye to someone she once loved, but also allowing those memories to cloud her certain knowledge that you simply failed to be the person she needed. You failed. I'm so proud of all my girls. Unlike you, Kyle, at every step of their lives, they made the correct choices to improve themselves as people. Louise enjoyed more success and fulfillment in one morning than you achieved in your entire miserable life. Do you recall, Kyle, how kind we all were to you, helping you and Louise enjoy trips away? Do you remember how she loved a swanky hotel? You were always invited to meals out, a Sunday lunch at the pub, or a special celebration. You were always made welcome. The only Christmas you spent together was at our house. Was it 4 or 5 days you spent with us? The food, the games, the laughter, the normality. What was it about that blissful experience you hated so much, Kyle? Could you not handle how pleasant it was? Such a contrast to what you were used to. The trips to Italy, Disneyland, and many more. Louise gave your relationship so much effort, which you were never able or willing to match. We all offered you kindness, especially Carol. She'd picked up on your personal inadequacies right from the start. She sensed your immaturity, but always knew Louise would work things out. Carol still displayed her compassion right up until the moment she answered the door to you on July the 9th. Do you remember her kindness, Kyle? How she urged you to get some relationship help and guidance for fear that you would never be able to sustain a lasting relationship? You calmly accepted that advice on the doorstep, and then, seconds later, savagely stabbed her 8 times and ended her life. When I challenge myself about how you were able to deceive us all, I simply say that you are a psychopath, who for the duration of your time together with Louise was able to disguise yourself as an ordinary human being. You reserved your best, make-believe version of yourself for the times you were in our house. You managed to maintain that veneer of decency throughout the first part of your time with Louise, but you couldn't maintain it in the early part of 2024. Although Carol and I never witnessed any alarming behaviour, your visits became less frequent. You began the first of 2 affairs that we know about. Your aversion to a day's hard work continued as you messed up yet another job at Reynolds. It wasn't only the army that found you worthless. I often think of the list Louise wrote to herself to remind her of the reasons that you fell short. The racism, she was rightly disgusted by that. Your belittling language, the fact that your family is a mess. Like any woman should be allowed to do, she worked you out, despite repeated deceit, and said enough is enough. I hope women around the world will take Louise's bravery as a shining beacon for their lives. If you feel enough is enough, then it is. So to remind you, over a period of 4 hours, you brutally killed Carol, waited over an hour until Louise came into the house. You incapacitated her, raped her, and when you realised Hannah was coming home, you shot Louise in the back. I can't imagine a more cowardly act. You couldn't look her in the eye. You murdered Hannah minutes later. A few weeks later, I also spent 4 hours with them, Kyle, in the funeral directors. The usual room wasn't big enough for 3 bodies, but they removed a partition wall so we could all be together. I sat for a while with Louise to my right. She looked so peaceful, and Hannah to my left. Carol was at the top of the room. She was dressed in a beautiful orange dress she had bought for a wedding we went to a month beforehand. I stroked her hair and told her how much I loved her. I thanked her for being such a wonderful partner in life and wonderful mother. They were my 4 hours, Kyle. And what about me? The impact of what you've done will be taken to my grave. But on the way there, I want you to know that I stand strong before you today, as you are consigned to a fate far greater than death, that can draw on the love and strength that I still feel from the girls in every moment of every day. I am lucky. I have many friends who watch out for me on an hourly basis. Carol's friends are mine, and I now have a renewed relationship with Hannah's and Louise's best friends. I will always be there for them, and they will be there for me too. So whilst I am so badly damaged, I am determined to see what my future is, surrounded by so many amazing people. And the chance to do so has been gifted to me by my incredible Hannah. I firmly believe that had she not managed to show such amazing physical and mental strength and raise the alarm after you fatally attacked her, then I would have been your 4th victim that day. Hannah handed me a second chance, one that she worked so hard to achieve for me. Now comes a time when your fate on this earth will be confirmed. Every single person in the world, I'm thinking of mothers and fathers, and in particular, especially their daughters, now expects the formality of a life sentence. Never again to make choices of your own. To breathe fresh air only occasionally. To eat when someone tells you to eat. But just remember one thing. Whatever sentence you're about to receive, whatever misery lies ahead for you for the next 60 years, remember that after your days on earth are done, on your dying day, there will be no release for you. The screams of hell, Kyle, I can hear them faintly now. The red carpet will come out for you. At that point, when the person you could have been meets the person you are, you will realise your miserable fate will last for eternity. Just a break here. The bravery of John and Amy Hunt is incredible. Cannot imagine being able to cope with one of my family members being murdered, let alone 3. The fact that this man has tried to turn this absolute horror into a positive is beyond my understanding, and beyond what I am capable of. He's determined to continue to honour his slain family, to show Kyle Clifford that he hasn't won, that he won't take any more lives. He'll carry on to keep the memories of his family alive. One day, John and Amy may want to talk about what they're going through, and if they do, then they deserve our undivided attention and respect. I have no doubt that Carol, Hannah and Louise are somewhere, proud of both Amy and John, and will watch over them until they're reunited one day. So at 2 p.m, Judge Benetham delivered his remarks, addressing an empty dock. This was recorded, and I'll play the last part of the sentencing, but we'll leave a link to the full thing below.
I am satisfied so that I am sure that you both planned and contemplated killing all three of your victims. I've already mentioned your planning. You knew the routine and habits of that household. You clearly anticipated that Carol Hunt would be in the house as you went equipped to trick your way inside. You must have known Louise Hunt would be working in the building in the garden, as you knew her routine, and she was the obvious target to be raped and murdered. You knew the routines of the household. You were there for over 4 hours and must have anticipated that Hannah Hunt would return. While you had used Louise Hunt's phone to ensure John Hunt would not be home any time soon, you made no such inquiry about Hannah. You would have known she wore a uniform for work, which she would be bound to come home to change before doing anything else in the evening. I am sure that Hannah too was part of your premeditation and that you intended to murder her if the chance presented itself. Those findings alone could lead to the imposition of a whole life term, but there are 4 further very serious aggravating factors. First, the relevant section of the schedule is triggered by, quote, the murder of 2 or more persons, I stress, or more. It seems to me the fact there were, quote, more, unquote, must be a relevant factor for a judge to have in mind. Otherwise, the courts would be saying the murder of 3 people added nothing to the sentence for the murder of 2, an unthinkable proposition. Second, the rape of Louise Hunt, of which the jury found you guilty last week, which offence was part of the same plan and the same course of conduct as the 3 killings. Third, these murders took place against a woman with whom you had been in an intimate relationship and her family, and so is within the Sentencing Council guidance on domestic abuse, which context makes crimes even more serious. Fourth, the murders of Louise and Hannah Hunt must have involved them becoming aware of the murders you had already committed, thereby inflicting dreadful mental suffering before death, a specified aggravating factor under the schedule. You have been referred to at times as a former soldier. In many cases, that would serve as significant mitigation. Not so in your case, however, as your 2 years in the army included 286 days at home claiming to be ill. You never saw active service, and your utility to the armed forces can be gleaned in a parting comment from your commanding officer that, quote, his character is wholly unsuited to military employment, and he has no care nor concern beyond himself, unquote. There are 3 matters of mitigation. First, your lack of previous convictions. Second, your relative youth, though you were already 26 years old by the time of these offences. Third, you pleaded guilty to the offences of murder, though not at the first opportunity. I have reflected on all 3 aspects. The Sentencing Council guidance makes clear there may be cases where a guilty plea should lead the court to draw back from imposing a whole life order. I have considered and rejected that course, as the factors in favour of such an order are so compelling that they far outweigh all those pieces of mitigation. I am left in no doubt that this is a sentence I must impose. The sentences I pass are therefore: for possession of an offensive weapon, the crossbow, 1 year's imprisonment, concurrent. For the possession of an offensive weapon, the knife, 1 year's imprisonment, concurrent. For the murder of Carol Hunt, life imprisonment with a whole life order. The early release provisions are not to apply. For the false imprisonment of Louise Hunt, 8 years imprisonment, concurrent. For the rape of Louise Hunt, 20 years imprisonment, concurrent. For the murder of Louise Hunt, life imprisonment with a whole life order. The early release provisions are not to apply. For the murder of Hannah Hunt, life imprisonment with a whole life order. The early release provisions are not to apply.
So, to clarify, for the murder of Carol Hunt, the murder of Hannah Hunt, and the rape and murder of Louise Hunt, 26-year-old Kyle Clifford was sentenced to a whole life order, meaning that he will never be released from prison. He likely has decades rotting behind prison walls ahead of him, and I hope John Hunt is right, that when he eventually dies, the fires of hell are waiting for him, and the red carpet is rolled out for his arrival, signifying the start of an eternity of torment. Psychopathic, narcissistic, violent, sadistic, homophobic, transphobic, racist, and misogynistic. These are some of the main features of Kyle Clifford's personality. He's essentially the embodiment of every negative character trait a man, and I use that term loosely, can possess. He's someone who never contributed to society. All he ever brought was chaos and destruction. There are really no words in the English language to capture how evil he is. However, missing from that list I mentioned, and front and centre in this case, are the terms weak and pathetic. At his core, Kyle Clifford is a truly fragile, sad little boy who had no ability to cope with women having any sort of autonomy, as he was sure they would see him for what he was, and they would leave him. But let's start from the beginning. Whilst the names of Kyle's parents have not been published, there are clear indicators of the environment he grew up in. His family was described as a mess, and his father was violent. This is likely just the tip of the iceberg. This was likely a house of horrors. I imagine that serious domestic violence was commonplace. No love, no nurturing, teaching Kyle that women were there to abuse. Violence was how you deal with situations and gain respect, as well as being something to be celebrated and not condemned. This led to Kyle developing into a callous, woman-hating individual with no empathy and remorse, entirely self-absorbed, who felt entitled to do whatever he wanted, at whatever cost. If people defied him, especially women, they deserved to die. This environment produced not one, but 2 killers, who between them killed 4 people. I hope their parents are hanging their heads in shame, but I doubt it. I imagine, like they taught their sons, they're justifying their behaviour, portraying both as victims of the criminal justice system, blah blah blah. Kyle loved violence, this is clear. He revelled in it. He was not sickened by what his brother did. He was a geezer, a real hard man, and he would tell everyone about this. This childhood would have also impacted Kyle's development and self-esteem. At his core, he likely felt extremely lost and lonely, but created a shell around himself as protection, turning this perception of himself 180 to believing that he was special, magnificent in fact. He was a gangster. People should fear him, pay him respect. And this is how he presented himself, as a violent thug. He consumed the hateful rants of Andrew Tate, which would have reinforced his deranged self-perception that as a man, he was entitled to women. They were less than human, they were objects, there to simply use and abuse. On a side note, I need to do a video on Tate, as this is not an isolated incident of young men's violence towards women being linked to this specimen. But also I think it's important to highlight how messed up a society we are, where someone this dangerous, who clearly has countless victims, is venerated by millions of people, and has become wealthy off the misery of others. Anyway, back to Kyle. He then met Louise Hunt, a woman who was beautiful, intelligent, compassionate and hard-working. He was constantly scared she would leave him. She was clearly a far better person than he was. but rather than working hard to change himself, to be the man she deserved, he sought to erode her self-esteem, cut her off from her friends, make her feel ugly and stupid, turning her into a shell, the amazing woman she was, so that she would believe no one else would want her. He was the best she would ever get, and should be forced to stay with him. Because he was so weak, Kyle was cheating on Louise. He was in multiple relationships so that if one ended, he wouldn't be alone and could simply move on to the next one. Kyle was clearly extremely jealous. He couldn't stand the idea of Louise having contact with any other males, and he wouldn't let her wear makeup, all because he was terrified she would find someone better. And this is how domestic abusers see relationships, not a union between two people, but a power struggle to fill the dark void inside of them. They'll cheat, lie, and beat their partners, but when it all falls apart, it's everyone else's fault. And this is what happened. Louise got tired of him. She left him. When this happened, he likely felt a combination of extreme fear and anger. Fear as the dread of being abandoned permeated the shell he'd formed around himself. Also anger that his property had dared to leave him and made him feel this way. This was all her fault. I think that Kyle jumped to the conclusion, as many of these men do, that the reason why he'd been left was because Louise was in a new relationship or she'd been cheating on him. This was completely ignoring the fact that he'd been unfaithful himself, and it was his behaviour which had led to this outcome. He twisted it round in his head to make himself the victim, and he also decided that if he couldn't have Louise Hunt, he would make sure no one ever did, and he started planning her murder. The big question in this case is, why did Kyle Clifford murder Louise's family? I think there are potentially 3 reasons for this. Firstly, to hurt Louise, to cause her the maximum amount of pain. Potentially he planned to kill her family members in front of her. Secondly, whilst we don't know about the details of the end of the relationship, I think that Kyle likely felt that the other members of the family should have been punished because they had sided with Louise when the breakup happened. He was potentially indignant that they hadn't said to Louise, "You're making a mistake, that Kyle guy, he's really lovely." Thirdly is jealousy. It's clear that Kyle came from a broken home, but for 18 months he had a family. He spent Christmas with the Hunts, went on holiday with them. He was one of them, and now that was over. I think, like his thinking with Louise, he couldn't stand there moving on without him, taking another man under their wing. If he annihilated them all, none of this would ever happen. As to the attack itself, we don't know what Kyle Clifford's specific plan was, but I think that certain details show what he was intending, and also highlights just how sadistic and evil he is. He bought both weapons to kill, but also to restrain. I think it's likely that he was intending to kill Carol, Hannah and John, but he was going to tie up Louise. He was going to keep her alive, to torment her and abuse her, and this is exactly what he did. He kept her alive for over 2 hours, and will likely never know exactly what happened during this time. I imagine that, sadist that he is, Kyle spent this time tormenting Louise, telling her that he killed her mother and would soon kill her sister and father. He also raped Louise, degrading her, demonstrating his power over her one more time. What she went through in those final hours has haunted me since I learnt about this case. Coward that he is, Kyle Clifford had no intention of being held accountable for his actions, and so he shot himself with a crossbow. But this failed, so he had to face the legal proceedings. Initially he pleaded not guilty to everything, but I think he had time to think and realised he was screwed, so he admitted to the murders. But he wouldn't admit to the sexual assault. This was about his status in prison. If he was simply a triple murderer, he could walk, in his deranged mind, with his head held high. But if he was labelled a sex offender, he would be at the bottom of the prison pecking order. This was his main issue. He was perfectly willing to put John and Amy Hunt through the hell of a trial, hearing how 3 members of their family had been brutally murdered and Louise had been violated before her death. No doubt Kyle Clifford saw his not attending the trial and his sentencing as his last demonstration of power, but it only reinforces the fact these are weak, pathetic sack of flesh, who now will spend the rest of his miserable life in prison, paralysed, confined to a wheelchair, a convicted sex offender, surrounded by some of the most dangerous men in the country. Let's see how that works out for him. So what are your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. You can also send a one-off donation to support the channel using the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.